What if I told you that Jesus' trial wouldn't have even lasted 5 minutes in a real court? Today we're going to be talking about the trial of Jesus, but not in like a religious way, not in like we're trying to preach about it, but we're talking about it as a legal court case. When we actually look at what happened for Jesus' court case to take place, like the craziest part of this whole story isn't even about the crucifixion itself. It's the fact that what had to happen for the Jesus's crucifixion to take place. And we're going to be talking about how almost every rule that existed had to be ignored for Jesus to be crucified and for a verdict to be decided on him. So, this trial of Jesus wasn't really a mistake, and it definitely wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a bunch of people, higher ups, the elite ranks, who knew what they were doing, and they just hated Jesus so much that they wanted to break every single of their own laws just to get rid of someone that they didn't like.
Let's start with the arrest. So Jesus got arrested at night in the Garden of Gethsemane, and this is wrong in so many ways. There was no warrant, there was no formal charges read, and there was no public announcement. And back then, the Jewish law required that accusations and witnesses were presented before an arrest, especially in serious cases. But that didn't happen. Instead, they arrested him quietly, away from crowds, and even away from daylight. Why? Because arrests done in the dark are easier to control. Right away, the process is already super duper duper sketchy.
To add on to what Caleb said about the trial and the arrest being private when it's supposed to be public, there was honestly, you can tell there was no attempt to like be honest or like try and follow the law. If the elite leaders really believed that Jesus was dangerous and guilty of whatever they were charging him for, they could have arrested him during the day. Like, if they were confident and they truly knew that Jesus was a criminal, then they would have been fine with arresting him during the day because they wouldn't have to be sneaky about anything. And obviously, everyone else would know that Jesus was truly a criminal. Um, they would have done it in the temple because, like I said, everyone would have known Jesus is wrong, but they didn't do that because obviously Jesus didn't do anything wrong. They already knew they were wrong from the start. And that's why they waited for night to happen so no one could come and judge them and be like, hey, what you're doing is wrong. We all know that like this trial of Jesus is not what justice looks like. And this brings me to the next point that we're going to talk about that had to happen for Jesus' trial that was illegal. After they arrested Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, they took him to the high priest's house. And again, this is like in the middle of the night. They're not going to court. They're not going to a courtroom, which is what should have happened according to the law. They're not in a public space. They're literally in a house. And this is like the students going to Mr. Nicola's house in the middle of the night. And I don't know, to me that just sounds like a senior prank thing, just showing up at Mr. Nicola's house in the middle of the night. Like, this trial is not a senior prank, like seriously. Um
Exactly. So actually, Jewish law stated that capital trials, the ones where somebody could get the death penalty, were not allowed at night. And this trial most definitely happened in the night. So they actually had to be done during the day so that the evidence, like the evidence from the trial, could be checked properly. And the trial started in the dark, and that alone should have invalidated everything.
right, and the Sanhedrin, which is mentioned in the verses we're reading, is basically the Jewish court. They had an official meeting place. They had a court where these trials had to happen. And yeah, Jesus' trial didn't happen there. Again, everything was private. The rules about location existed to stop trials like these from happening. And they really wanted Jesus to die, and they didn't like them, and that's why they ignored that.
This one's a big one. So judges were supposed to be very unbiased, and they still are today. They're supposed to seriously consider innocence of each person and not just guilt. But all the religious leaders were already like in the mindset of hating Jesus. He had challenged their authority, he had like embarrassed them, he like called them vipers and like whatever. And he didn't really follow all of their traditions. And so they weren't trying to figure out the truth from him. They were just trying to get rid of what they thought was a problem. And that is just not fair.
Now we can talk about the witnesses. And so Jewish law required that at least two witnesses have stories that match exactly. And when they had their witnesses, they didn't match up. So that wasn't quite right, obviously. The witnesses, their stories were basically kind of like opposites. They didn't add up, they contradicted each other. Details weren't lining up. And according to the law, once that happens, the case should be done. And there should be like no conviction, there should be no verdict since everything is like invalid. And obviously, that would mean if the stories aren't matching up, obviously that means it's probably not true. But instead of stopping the trial, the leaders kept going and they kept getting more witnesses and more witnesses. They were ignoring their own rules. And even when the witnesses were bringing up stuff that Jesus said that were true, that he did say that, it still didn't add up and match to the evidence of whatever the witnesses were trying to say. It was just a whole mess, and it was so obvious that none of this was true. And by now, you can tell that everybody, the witnesses, the high priests, the elders, they just really wanted Jesus dead. They really wanted to find something that Jesus did wrong so they could kill him, crucify him. They were just tired of all of his crap. Now, this next illegal thing might be the most hypocritical moment of the entire trial. Now, this next illegal moment might be the most hypocritical thing of the entire trial, even though there's a lot. But I think this one might take first place so far. When Jesus responds, the high priest gets so angry that he tears his garments and his robe. And yes, this is very dramatic. It sounds dramatic and it's also illegal. It's against the law. High priests were forbidden from tearing their garments because these clothes symbolize like obedience and control and respect for the law, because of course this is the high priest. Everybody's looking up to this guy, and then he just tore his clothes in front of everybody, and that's just so wrong. There's like no, he doesn't have control. This is kind of like the stuff he's doing is opposite of like what his role is. And he's the man accusing Jesus of breaking the law, and then he literally breaks it in front of everyone. And this moment alone should have disqualified him. Like, as we talked in religion class, he should be stoned for this. He should be getting a death penalty for tearing his robe. But everybody's just so focused on trying to find wrong in Jesus to crucify him that nothing happens, and the high priest just gets to keep being high priest for the rest of this trial, even though he broke a very important law.
It's happening at night, right? So there's already a huge timing issue. But arguably, there's an even bigger timing issue, and that is that this trial is happening during Passover. And this is one of the most important, if not the most important, Jewish holidays. So capital trials were not allowed on holy days, and all of Passover were holy days. But still they continued. And on top of that, Jewish law required a waiting period between a guilty verdict and sentencing. So like there needed to be time between when they were found guilty and when they like sentenced to either death or like jail or like all these different things. And so this should have given time to reconsider or like show mercy, but they took that away. Jesus didn't get any of that time that he should have gotten. They just decided to rush everything and make it super fast so that they could just get Jesus gone because they really hated him.
Here's something that people forget. There was an authority problem. So the Jewish leaders did not even have the authority to execute Jesus. Rome did. Rome had the power to execute Jesus. And so what did they do for this trial to happen? They changed the charge. Blasphemy wouldn't matter to Rome at all, but treason would. And so suddenly Jesus was being accused of claiming to be king. This was the same person, same trial, but now it was a different accusation. And that alone should prove how fake the trial was. Because why, as an elite leader who knows what he's doing, I guess, knows what he's doing, why are you trying to change charges? Like, that should not be happening. Obviously, there is something wrong. Now we're getting to the end of the trial. We are now going to talk about Rome getting involved. So Jesus is taken to Pontius Pilate after the Sanhedrin, all the witnesses, the elders, they can't find anything wrong about Jesus. They can't find any evidence to convict him or to say anything that he's guilty because nothing's adding up. And so Jesus gets taken to Pilate, and Pilate questions Jesus, but he doesn't really find him guilty because there is nothing wrong. They are just trying to get rid of Jesus because they don't like him. But Pilate also doesn't want to be troubled by anything. The crowd is loud. They want to crucify Jesus. The leaders are angry. They're telling Pilate that he can become an enemy of Caesar if he chooses not to crucify Jesus. And so everybody's angry at this point. Pilate's in a really tough situation. He doesn't know what to do. He knows that if he lets them hurt Jesus, then he will be wrong because he knows that in his heart that Jesus is innocent and there is nothing that Jesus has done that should be said guilty. And so right now, Pilate thinks the best thing to do is tell the leaders to give the leaders what they want, basically. In this situation, he thinks that justice is now becoming less important than keeping the peace. And so Pilate approves of the crucifixion. And that is the trial of Jesus. Now let's go through a quick recap of all of the stuff we talked about so far. When you put all of it together, it's honestly so messed up.
Jesus was arrested illegally. Like, nobody was there to see it happen. It was not public. He was tried at night. That's illegal. In the wrong place, in someone's house instead of the courtroom. That's illegal. On a holy day like Passover. That's illegal.
And even the witness accounts were contradicting each other. None of the accounts added up. When they were trying to say something that Jesus said to help them prove Jesus was guilty, it didn't work either. And the high priest broke the law himself. Like, he tore his clothes. That literally he should have been stoned for that. But of course, everyone just breezed by that the fact he broke a very important law. And they were trying to pressure Jesus into saying that he was guilty when they couldn't find anything that could make Jesus guilty.
There was not even a waiting period. There was no time for judges to reconsider to see if Jesus was truly guilty or not. No mercy period. There was no fair defense. He had no one to defend him. And there were no unbiased judges. Everyone was biased against Jesus. And when the court realized that it couldn't execute him because blasphemy and their rules say that you can't execute someone, they just changed the charge from blasphemy to treason so that Rome would take up the case.
And the people whose job was to protect the law, they just broke it over and over again. They accused Jesus of breaking the law while they were breaking every single law necessary to kill him. And that's the part that really matters.
This wasn't just unfairness and all of this stuff happening. It wasn't accidental. This was very purposeful. This was all the fairness was being ignored on purpose. And that's how the crucifixion happened.
And this was only the trial. Wait until you hear about what happened on the cross.